Hello and welcome to the COP30 Newsroom here at High House, live from the COP30 site in Belém, Brazil. Every morning we are bringing you behind the scenes on the biggest stories of the day with a selection of the best climate journalists in the world. To kick us off today, I'm delighted to be joined by Tim McDonald, Climate and Energy Editor at Semaphore and the author of the Semaphore Energy newsletter, an absolute must-read if you're in the game, and Mariana Vick from Nexo Journal. Welcome to you both.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, great. So look, let's kick it off with the biggest story around the world today from COP. This is one chosen by the team here, which was dozens of protesters stormed the COP30 venue in Brazil. Obviously, great pictures, so TV and social media loved it.
All over it.
In terms of significance and the COP process, I don't know how big a deal it is, but Tim, let's start with you. What did you think when you heard about it all?
I mean, I came out of the COP last night and just saw lots of security guards running in different directions and chaos, so I didn't know what happened. But I mean, I think these kinds of altercations there's always a big protester presence at COP, and you know, I wasn't inside the front hall of the venue, so it's a little hard to say, you know, how exactly it was handled. It looked like the front doors of the building had all been barricaded with furniture that I guess the security guards put up there. You know, so hopefully they kind of handled it in a diplomatic way. There was military police surrounding, but I didn't see any obvious abuses of force or anything like that. So it's kind of this is part of the process. We get so many people in a room together, and you know, things can get chaotic. But
Mariana, were you in the building when the protesters came?
No, I was just leaving the blue zone. I was outside on the street waiting for my van to pick me home. And I saw these people, and a lot of people associated with a political party in Brazil called PSOL. It's a leftist party. So I just saw that, and I thought, okay, it's normal. It happens in all COPs. But I think it's interesting to say what they were talking about. They were trying to expose that environmental policy in Brazil, it seems like it's something for the outside, for other countries, and something very different for Brazilians. So right now, we are about to begin a research of oil here in the Amazon, in the Amazonian, the Atlantic
Equatorial
Ocean.
margin.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a contradiction, right? And so our president says he wants to be a climate leader, but at the same time, he does this when we feel like Brazilians, we feel like we don't need more oil, right? So
Yeah. Well, look, I think that takes us very neatly onto our next story. This time it's from Associated Press. Indigenous groups get the spotlight at UN climate talks, but some say visibility is not power. Now, there was a large indigenous presence as well in the protests from yesterday, and it does always strike me at COPs that there is a large indigenous presence when you walk around. I do sometimes wonder the extent to which there's some tokenism about that. Tim, you're nodding.
Yeah, I think obviously at these COPs, there's a lot of segmentation between the different types of groups that are represented. You have the government delegates that are sort of sequestered in a back room somewhere behind closed doors, talking about this very technical stuff in the negotiations. You have, you know, civil society, protesters, of course, indigenous groups are highly present at every COP. It's nice to have all these people kind of in one place at one time. The extent to which they are sort of interacting with one another in a meaningful way or influencing one another, I think, is not very clear. So, I mean, I will say, just to build on the point from that you made from the last article, I think one of the great things about having COP move around to different parts of the world every year, is that it is a chance for the local concerns in whatever place is hosting the COP to put those concerns on a global stage. And you have this kind of forum of a UN venue where speech is maybe actually easier than when this came up a lot in Egypt. There were a lot of human rights concerns in Egypt that couldn't be voiced in normal channels in Egyptian civil society, but a lot of activists really came to the fore in the COP and were able to elevate those concerns because of being on this international platform. So I do think there's a kind of level of sort of elevation that can happen here.
Yeah.
Whether indigenous groups are kind of having a meaningful impact on the outcome, I think, is less clear.
Yeah. Mariana?
Yeah, and I also think that they're starting to articulate how can they have more power for the next COPs, maybe. So this is just the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, look, let's go to story number 3. We have the hottest ticket in town in Brazil might just be a meeting with Gavin Newsom. Tim, you had a meeting with Gavin Newsom yesterday, the hottest ticket in town. Tell us about it.
Yeah, we were, well, I not me personally, but we were on stage at the same time at an event with a lot of local leaders from the U.S., mayors and leaders of universities, and of course, Governor Newsom from California, who, because we've been having our government shutdown in the U.S., the usual delegation of congressional leaders was canceled, so Governor Newsom ended up being the highest-ranking U.S. official to attend. Of course, we had no presence from the State Department or the usual U.S. negotiators, so there's sort of the lone U.S. Senior official to actually come to the summit, and so it did get a lot of attention. Governor Newsom clearly is seen as a likely candidate for president in our next election, very likely to be the Democratic candidate. And I think is trying to chart a course on energy and climate that, of course, is the polar opposite of what President Trump has been doing, and he's very vocal about that. And I think one thing that I just took away from Governor Newsom's comments yesterday is that he's really trying to reframe the climate conversation in economic terms, talking about energy affordability and jobs. And he made the point repeatedly that China is surging ahead on all of these clean technologies, dominating the market for EVs and renewable energy manufacturing and so many other aspects of this. And if the U.S. sits on the sidelines of that transformation, it's a real missed opportunity economically. And I think that, I think he feels that that's a message that will also resonate politically. So that's what we heard from him yesterday.
Mariana, I'd love to hear a Brazilian perspective on this, because obviously relations between President Lula's government and the Trump administration are extremely strained. How does it feel from a Brazilian point of view?
I don't think I can speak about the little things about American policy, but I can talk about how we feel about United States not coming, and I think our view is that it's kind of bad, for sure, but at least the Trump administration is not blocking the negotiations, and it's.
So
we'll take what we can get there. I think.
I think that's a really, really good point, because people talk about the absence an awful lot, but actually, if America had sent a delegation and it was being very obstructive, it would be a completely different scenario.
I think that's absolutely right. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, Mariana, next up is a story from yourself. This is about climate adaptation. How climate adaptation is featured in the COP30 discussions. Please tell us about the story.
Okay, so this is a story. I'm trying to explain what's at stake at COP for adaptation. So what are the negotiators talking about right now? So the global goal on adaptation, there's a huge decision that is expected to be made at COP30 right now. There are little details, it's not much a big decision, but little details that are important because they will help us to get to the implementation, right? So President Lula says all the time it's the COP of implementation. And so yeah, this is what I'm talking about. What are the things they are talking about? Little details, but that are important about climate finance for adaptation, or the indicators for adaptation that they need to approve, that could help us finally maybe to get to a point where we can um, make adaptation happen. Not being just a plan.
Yeah, absolutely. Tim?
Yeah, I think one thing I'm watching with adaptation, in addition to the negotiations, is the role of the private sector in this. There's a number of large insurance companies that are here at COP. There are, uh, building and construction engineering companies that are here. Others that are kind of in the space of the financial infrastructure, private sector, private equity that's needed to finance a lot of adaptation. And I think adaptation had this reputation for a number of years of being something that was, of course, necessary, but hard to make money doing, and the private sector had stayed away. I think that's really starting to change now, in part because technology is improving. There's a lot more opportunities. The business case is really being proved out for a lot of different avenues. And also, of course, the necessity of adaptation is becoming more obvious all the time. I mean, we're moving into this very likely, somewhere between 2 to 3 degrees of warming based on our current trajectory. So, that's a world that's going to need climate adaptation, and so that demand is really going to be there. So that's what we're watching.
And just picking up on another of Mariana's points, which is the organisers want this to be the implementation COP and really fleshing out what's been agreed previously. So things like the finance deal that happened in Baku, the new collective quantified goal to help poorer countries, but also carbon markets, carbon trading. Article 6, to use the jargon here. That's something you've been writing about, Tim.
Yeah, I think one of the things with COP always is that you have these decisions that are taken at an international level. They're not very meaningful until countries take them back to their own national policies and take the steps within their own countries to make that a reality. There's nothing at COP that can happen to force one country to do something. So I think carbon markets is a great example where we had a lot of decisions around setting the rule book for international carbon trading at last year's COP in Azerbaijan. So far, there's been very little activity in that market, in part because some of the countries in Africa or in Latin America or elsewhere where that could be great contributors of carbon credits into this market are struggling to set up their own national policies to make that a reality. So I think that's this idea of implementation. I think is really important to kind of push countries to adopt their own national policies, and we'll see how much of that gets done this week. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, look, next up we have our next story, which is about COP in 2 years' time. Ethiopia to host COP30 in 2027. Still no host chosen for COP next year in 2026. What do you both think of that, Mariana?
I think it's important that COPs happen in developing countries. I think in Brazil, this is an opportunity for us to show what are the subjects that concern us, like adaptation, as I was saying. So yeah, I don't think I have a lot more to say.
We'll see what happens with next year. There's this fight going on now between Australia and Turkey about who will host next year's COP. These things happen every year. There's also sort of race at the last minute to figure out where it's going to be next year. This is the first time that I can remember where the subsequent COP has already been decided. So that's nice because we can just stop talking about it and move on to something else that's more important. And we'll see for next year if it's going to be in Adelaide or in Turkey or maybe in Bonn.
Split even.
Yeah, in Bonn in Germany, which is the fallback option if they can't agree on something. Although Politico also reported this week that the Germans are not very excited about that option.
Yeah,
too.
they were saying Germany had come in as a mediator between Australia and Turkey because it wants to host COP so little.
Right,
and they're doing everything they can.
I'm looking forward to Ethiopia is a beautiful country, and I'm looking forward to visiting there.
Yeah, fantastic. And then our final story of the day. This is from The Guardian. Removing CO2 from the atmosphere, vital to avoid catastrophic tipping points, leading scientist says. The scientist in question was Johan Rockström, probably the most recognizable scientist in the space. This struck me as very interesting as a story. He was saying that to hit 1.7, we need to build, I think the report was the second largest industry on Earth, simply to remove carbon dioxide from the air. It's something you hear talked about at the margins. It's never part of the agenda at COP. It's never talked about very seriously. I mean, if Johan Rockström is saying this, do we need to take it more seriously?
I think it's a complicated proposal because I think personally we need to stop emissions. We need to reduce emissions. And this kind of proposal maybe will distract us from that goal. But I also understand the emissions gap reports from UN this year. It said for the first time that we are not getting to 1.5. So maybe it's necessary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's clear when you look at any of the good forecasts around emissions and the energy sector in the future that if we want to have any hope of staying below 2 degrees, some level of carbon removal is absolutely going to be necessary. You know, right now you see really the early stages of development of a strong market for carbon removal credit trading. This is kind of the next phase of the carbon markets that's just starting to develop. The big tech companies, Google, Amazon, Meta, are, all of them are, Microsoft are all buying carbon removal credits. So that's the kind of channel of finance that's going to go into supporting some of the technologies to get that stood up.
Yeah, so just on the mechanism for the audience, Tim, that would essentially mean there was an industry set up where people removed carbon from the air. That created a credit, and people who were creating emissions could then buy that credit to offset what they're doing.
Right. To even go beyond offsetting, because you're going below zero, removing existing carbon from the air. And there's different ways to do this. There's the high tech kind of carbon sucking fans that are. There's some in Iceland. The kind of technology is cropping up. There's also just very basic nature-based solutions. Planting trees is also a form of carbon removal. So I think we're going to definitely see a lot more of that, and it's just about how do we kind of create the financial mechanism to pay for more of those projects, and that will happen, I think, in the near future. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, great stuff, both of you. Thank you so much for coming on the program to start the day.
Happy to be here. Thank you so much.
That's all we have time for this morning. A huge thanks to our audience watching around the world. Please stay tuned for more of the COP30 Newsroom every morning here from the High House Pavilion in Belém.